Penn State is a clear-cut national title contender. And one of those teams they could face in the championship game might very well come from the ACC.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC and Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen. Everydayers, we love you. This is an epic crossover event. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On ACC and Locked On Wolfpack, and the great Zach Seyko from Locked On Nittany Lions. And heck, Penn State, they took on and beat a team from the ACC in the CFP last year. History could repeat itself. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We'll talk about possible quarterback matchups. Drew Allar versus Cade Klubnik or Carson Beck. We'll talk about game matchups, how that could go down. And it might not necessarily be Clemson or Miami. There could be a dark horse that could sneak in. And Zach, I want to start with you on this because obviously there's a pretty good chance, a great chance the ACC is going to get a team, maybe two teams in the CFP. But what about Penn State? In it last year, made a little bit of a run, fell to Notre Dame before the championship game. How do you handicap the Nittany Lions' road to get to a second straight CFP this year?
Well, and Penn State wasn't that far off, right? They only lost by 3 points, and because of a couple bad throws by Drew Allar. I mean, Penn State, if he gets one of those, if he gets a mulligan on the Nicholas Singleton touchdown where he dumps it off into the flat, because then that gives Penn State the lead, or just doesn't throw the interception, Penn State might go on to win that game against Notre Dame. And we're talking about a different scenario here. But I think this team picks up right where they left off. They got to the national semifinal. That nucleus, that core that propelled them there, aside from Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren, but Drew Allar, both your superstar running backs, a new starting cast of veteran wide receivers. These aren't inexperienced playmakers. There's no debating, okay, what can they do? What can't they do? And you guys should be familiar with Trevor Pena to an extent. And then you get those up-and-coming breakout stars at the tight end position to take over for Tyler Warren. But I think this team is built on the fact that you have an offensive line that's returning 80% of its production, more technically, but you only have 4 out of the 5 starters, but you have some other rotational guys. And then you get Jim Knowles, you add him to the defense and you make them better. And other superstars will emerge where Abdul Carter is gone. Dennis Sutton takes over in that role. Zane Durant, other guys will emerge, but it's how Penn State finished in that semifinal last year and looks like a better team on paper going into this season.
So you talk about Penn State looking like a better team on paper this year. By the way, you're welcome. As the ACC guys, we'll let you know. Trevor Pena, exactly. We'll let you know. Seeing Trevor Pena leave the ACC was hurtful for us, but we're just glad that he's happy. Y'all take care of him, okay? But with the improved roster, you all aren't the only ones that improved in the nation, but specifically in the Big Ten, right? Michigan seems to have their answer at quarterback with Underwood coming in. Ohio State, is the national champion. They're the defending national champions. So you look at that situation and multiple others throughout the Big Ten. You go all the way to the West Coast with USC getting better as well, according to most. And you say to yourself, how much more do you think Penn State improved than the teams around them? Or do you think that they just kept pace in terms of, hey, we did not slide back in our spot, but we also didn't gain ground on anybody? Where would you stand on that?
I would say Penn State should be expected to be the best team in the Big Ten going into this season and has a case to be number 1 overall aside to Texas. I think it's either Penn State or Texas. And it's not because, Ohio State, well, they're the defending national champion. You are breaking in a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator, play caller, and a new defensive coordinator, and you lost a bulk of that nucleus that Penn State brings back. So Michigan did it with J.J. McCarthy and company. Ohio State did get Will Howard, but they had that nucleus of Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, and that's what Penn State is mimicking. They're mirroring that, where you have the veteran quarterback, you have the consistency amongst the coordinators and Andy Kotelnicki, but then you upgrade now with Jim Knowles. You take that away from Ohio State, right? You took that piece of the puzzle away from the team that's been a thorn in your side for the longest time, believe me, a long time. So I think Penn State has the right, it has the case to be considered the best team in the Big Ten. Now they just got to prove it.
Yeah, and then, of course, you look on the ACC side, the top college football playoff contenders. You start with the Clemson Tigers, who, won the conference last year. They got outed by Texas in the opening round of the CFP last year. It was a closer game than people remembered based on the score, but obviously outplayed and rightfully put away. But we think Clemson is probably a little bit better than they were a season ago, and a big part of that is continuity. They returned the highest percentage of last year's production of any team in America, which is saying something, including their quarterback, Cade Klubnik, returning. So there are reasons why Clemson, who won the conference last year, are favored to do so again. Most of the odds makers would have Miami, which is a very talented football team. I know this better than anyone. They tend to underachieve, but Miami, rightfully so, I think, are sort of, the second team in that pecking order who could potentially wind up winning the conference or at least making the college football playoff. And, Zach, the answer is probably Clemson, but which team from the ACC would you prefer not to face and why? And talk about those possible matchups.
Clemson for all the same reasons that I just laid out for Penn State. If you now continue to do my due diligence, I feel like there's a little bit of time here to make those overall season predictions, but I don't think it's crazy to think that for most people, I think the chalk championship game should be Clemson and Penn State. I really think between Cade Klubnik and Drew Allar, Dabo Swinney, and James Franklin shouldn't be in the same. They're both top 10 head coaches. They both are. If Dabo Swinney's that much further ahead, but it's those, hello, Tom Allen. It's the combination of coordinators. Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles, I think, formed the best coordinator duo in the entire country. So all of the pressure isn't necessarily on James Franklin to be that big game coach, to be a huge X's and O's guys. Why? He gets to delegate to some of the best minds in college football as his assistants. They also shored up the assistant staff as well. You could argue that Penn State has the best coaching staff. Clemson has the same case. You have Cade Klubnik. You have the impressive wide receivers that he gets to throw to. He gets to throw to superstar wide receivers where, Penn State gets serviceable veterans. He's got a superstar supporting cast, and it's also the defense there. The defensive line for Clemson, that's the group that's always going to stand out to me with Tamarian Parker and Peter Woods. Peter Woods, if I'm not mistaken, there in the middle. Those two guys, kind of like Deni Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant. That's almost 1A, 1B in terms of that dynamic duo tandem on the defensive line in the country.
So when you look at Penn State, if I were an ACC team or if I were an ACC fan listening to this right now, I'm thinking, oh, Penn State's going to cruise to the championship. There's no doubt in my mind. Zach Seyko has sold me. But play devil's advocate for me a little bit. What is it that you worry about with Penn State where you say, if Penn State does not end up accomplishing Big Ten championship, national championship appearance, all those things, this will very likely be the reason why?
Defensive line depth and the D tackle spot, if I had to circle, and it's not an egregious concern. But if you go down one player for Zane Durant, I think Zane Durant's kind of almost that make or break player on the defense this year because they have depth at defensive end. They shored up the linebacker spot with another ACC player in Amari Campbell. But when they run a 4-2-5, when you have that anchor in the middle to be that 3-down defensive tackle, and if you lose, the same could probably be said for Clemson as well. So that would be the concern there is Zane Durant and the domino effect of being able to stop rushing attacks that are better than average if you do lose an anchor like him in the middle. But Jim Knowles has been around a long time and can make the adjustments on defense if he needs to.
Well, I want to get to when we come back because Clemson would be the chalk pick to be the first ACC team in and the one that could make the deepest run. Let's talk about the other contenders from Miami to Louisville to possibly SMU getting back into the dance this year. You want to keep it locked. This is an epic crossover. We got Locked On Nittany Lions. We got Locked On ACC. You want to keep it locked right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And are you new to FanDuel? Well, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And all you got to do is go to the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com to get started. That's right. All the sports that I mentioned, baseball, golf, soccer, WNBA, you can even bet on college football, yes, before the season starts. Do you think Penn State's going to go over 10.5 wins or under 10.5 wins? You can bet on the ACC teams as well, since we're talking about them. And there are lines for games in college football too. So all of that is available over at FanDuel. And if you are new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and will get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Thank you so much for making us your first listen. And make sure for your next listen, if you're a Locked On ACC listener, make sure you check out Locked On Nittany Lions. Same for Locked On Nittany Lions. Make sure you check out Locked On ACC. So much good content happening across this network. All right, so we've made the obvious case for Clemson to make it to the college football playoff and possibly see Penn State there. In terms of what it would take for a Miami to make a deep run, obviously Miami does not have the luxury of continuity in most places that Clemson does. The new starting quarterback in Carson Beck, who I know Kenton loves to rag on my guy Beck, but Kenton, the intelligence I'm hearing, the intel from the offseason workouts, no physical limitations, full recovery from the elbow surgery, and is doing well. And obviously he's got some catching up to do, building timing with his receivers, because he was not able to throw during spring practice. So Carson's working a little bit from behind, but supposedly doing very well. We'll find out more when fall camp begins. And the big thing for Miami, fellas, and the reason why they weren't in the college football playoff last year was the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed a year ago. And, a bunch of teams, we talked about Clemson, defensive coordinator change. Penn State had to make a defensive coordinator change, and a darn good one, getting Knowles in there. Miami also had to make a defensive coordinator change. They take Corey Heatherman out of Minnesota in the Big Ten, who had a good Golden Gophers defense last year. They seem to like his scheme so far. Miami brought in a ton of defensive secondary players, safeties and cornerbacks through the transfer portal, some linebackers as well, like Mohamed Touré, who played for Heatherman at Rutgers a couple of years ago. So, it's all about getting the parts to fit, because we've been having this conversation about Miami for the last 20 years, like with the talent usually being in there. It's all about, the right mix of coaching. It's about the right chemistry. So we'll obviously find out more when the season begins, but there's a reason why Miami is usually right behind Clemson when they handicap the conference. And if the Hurricanes can actually, not underachieve, at least achieve, if not overachieve this year, we could be talking about a college football playoff run.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think when I look at that Miami team, the biggest issues were addressed from last season. The only problem is the biggest star, the biggest propeller, the biggest, hey, I'm going to do my Atlas impression and put the world on my back from last year. And Cam Ward is now a Tennessee Titan. So, Xavier Restrepo, a guy who's all throughout the record books, he's now going as well. But I will tell you this, Miami and Penn State have one thing in common: returning a ton of talent in the trenches. And I would say even more so in Miami's case, because defensive line-wise, I think they are primed to be one of the best defensive lines in the nation. So I would not be surprised at all to see Miami get there. The only question mark they have now, how do you replace Cam Ward, right? Even if Carson Beck is fully healthy Carson Beck, do we believe that he is above the level of what Cam Ward was last year? That's to be seen.
Yeah.
I want to chime in there because I buy into Carson Beck because Georgia's wide receivers couldn't catch a cold, right? They led the nation in drops. So at some point, you drop the ball in the breadbasket and then the player drops the football. So I'm going to buy into Carson Beck making this team better. Do I think he's a number one overall selection like Cam Ward is, and somebody that can do all of those crazy superstar-esque type of things and ad lib? No, I don't think that either. But I think there's, the margin of error and another year just under his belt. I think Beck gets a bad rep, and it's almost like Drew Allar to an extent that the supporting cast wasn't helping him out outside of Tyler Warren. Okay. The other receivers weren't doing enough. We saw that in the Notre Dame game. So if Carson Beck's dealing with the same kind of situation, at least he was at Georgia that wasn't getting enough help. He was taking the blame for it. He got hurt in the process. So I think if Miami can keep him upright, this team, I look at that schedule and it's like they just need to gel. Now I'm a little more concerned about Clemson than I am Miami. If I had to choose the two, I'd rather face Miami than I'd rather face Clemson if I'm a Penn State fan. So, but if they can just, hey, maybe make a surprise against Notre Dame, who knows? But that schedule doesn't look daunting to me for Miami. I could theoretically see them losing only one game against that Notre Dame team.
Yeah, so I know you're over there in the Big Ten where the schedules are tough. That Miami's ACC schedule with out-of-conference games like Notre Dame and Florida, that's one of the tougher schedules in the ACC. So that's just the life we live.
Absolutely. So with the way that we are talking about Clemson and Miami as potential opponents for Penn State in the playoffs, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, Zach. So I want to ask you: is there any other team in the ACC that you look at and you'd say, but after dismantling of SMU last year, 11-win team, conference runner-up, is there any other team that you look at that say, they give us some problems? You got to look out for them if we see them on the horizon in terms of, just coming in preseason blank slate. Is there anybody that would say, hey, that team would give Penn State all they could handle and maybe even more?
If you want me to be honest, no. I really think it's Clemson. There's a gap, then Miami, then an even larger gap. But I will give my due respect because SMU is returning Kevin Jennings. I think that guy is a dark horse contender for the Heisman because of what he can do. He just got set up with a bad situation against Penn State. That doesn't define who he is as a quarterback just because of one bad game. I mean, SMU had a bad game all around. It wasn't just on Kevin Jennings. So with that being said, I think the Miller Moss to Louisville is intriguing. I'm interested to see how that plays out. But I really do think the only serious contenders I think that Miami could win a game in the CFP. Could I don't think they'd get a bye. They would win a game in the CFP and then probably get knocked out in the second round. But then Clemson is legitimately a team that I say Penn State and Clemson could absolutely meet in a semifinal or all the way in the championship. That's what I think of the Tigers.
By the way, Kenton, I hope a little earlier when Zach was talking about Carson Beck and the supporting cast, I hope you were taking notes because every time we talk about him, all you do is dog the young man. When Zach knows Carson Beck's receiving core in Georgia last year led the nation in drops. They literally led the nation in drops. Give the man a little help, and he can do something for you this year.
Oh, don't worry. Zach's quarterback is not safe either. That's the beauty of today's episode. Zach's sitting up there on his high horse telling us how good Penn State is, and he's right to do so.
You know what? You know what? Hold that thought because I want to dive into the quarterback possibilities when we come back. From Drew Allar to Cade Klubnik, who is one of those Heisman front, and as is Allar, by the way, two of the Heisman front runners to Carson Beck. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. Locked on ACC, Locked on Nittany Lions crossover right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, I'm going to let Kenton start this one off because you've got strong opinions. We've heard your opinions on Locked On ACC about Carson Beck. We've actually, even on Locked On ACC, we've heard Kenton's opinions on Drew Allar. So dealer's choice, KG. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, here's the thing. Everybody knows how I feel about Beck. And I just said, I think that the kid is good. I think he's good enough. I don't think that he's very good to elite. And I believe the exact same thing about Drew Allar. Let me explain to you how big the Drew Allar hype has gotten this offseason. There are multiple people who have national platforms saying Drew Allar is so good. If he would have went in last year's draft, he would have been the ¡1 pick. You want to know how I know that's not true? Because he didn't enter the draft. But I digress. Zach, I do want to let off one statement, and I'm gonna let you cook after this because I know that this is gonna get some big reaction. I done already pissed off Pitt fans and telling them Kenny Pickett wasn't the first round pick years ago. So I'm gonna go ahead and get Penn State. I'm gonna get the whole Pennsylvania because I thought that we could bond over our hate of Ohio, but Pennsylvania don't
might
want to
as
do
well.
that. So that's okay. That's what I thought we was gonna do. But that's okay. So I look at Drew Allar, and many people tell me, hey, he's the guy, he's this, he's that. I legitimately said going into last year's game against Notre Dame, if it comes down to quarterback play, Notre Dame is going to win this game. and everybody looked at me like I was crazy. They said there's no way that Riley Leonard outperforms Drew Allar, and I said Riley Leonard won't kill Notre Dame. Drew Allar absolutely can and probably will kill Penn State here. Objectively speaking, I think you and I can agree he killed them in the big game. 3 interceptions, one of which was called back because of a pass interference. What do you say to people who are in my camp that are saying, hey, we've seen Drew Allar beat up on nobodies. We've seen Drew Allar have a so-so game against Ohio State. But overall, we have not seen Drew Allar show up for the biggest moments. Even if you talk about against SMU, that running game was mauling SMU. I believe y'all averaged, 7.5 to 8 yards a carry, something crazy like that. So what do you say to the thought of, hey, if you have to make Drew Allar beat you, and he couldn't do it with 2 running backs that are probably going to be first 2-round picks, a tight end that's a first-round pick, he'll never do it. What's your rebuttal to that?
I mean, Drew is a better version of himself. I mean, let's start there. So the guy's he has that experience. He has that moment specifically against Notre Dame to say, if you let that one continue to bite you for the rest of your career, then you're not legitimate. And we're not going to know until it's actually on the football field. But I do believe that the adversity does make football players better. So I truly believe that Allar will be better because of that Notre Dame game and not worse because of it. He has the offensive line. He has the supporting cast. Again, we know that Trevor Pena, Kyron Hudson, and somebody that isn't going to get enough credence early on, Devontae Ross, he's a group of 5 receiver, but that guy's a speedster. Those guys are so much better than what Penn State had with Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, and then whoever else. You pick a random receiver that was in that rotation last year that they couldn't hold a candle to any of these 3 players, and particularly Trevor Pena, right? The all ACC receiver. So now you take all those complementary parts together, but this is about Drew Allar. So Allar's supporting cast is better. The continuity, the consistency with hhis OC and Andy Kotelnicki started to open up that potential a little bit for Allar. I think back to Mac Jones, when we looked at it, Mac Jones is a first-round pick. The steam that was there for the 49ers to trade up into the top 3 and go get him. He ended up, being selected 14th or 15th overall? I can't remember exactly. But did we get fooled to an extent? Because Devontae Smith was running wide open at all times. If Allar had a player like that, we wouldn't have these kind of issues now, would we? We wouldn't be having this discussion. Right. So he can hit those players when they are open, but when they're covered, they're blanketed, Allar's better off throwing an incompletion than throwing multiple interceptions. And that's one of his best attributes is decision-making and protecting the football. Aside from, again, the Notre Dame game is one, but you look at the rest of his film, he doesn't turn the ball over a lot. He's actually pretty safe with it. So that's where I'll say that Allar he has the supporting cast that can finally take that pressure off of him.
Well, and if we segue to Cade Klubnik, he has a lot of the things that Drew Allar didn't have last year, that Carson Beck didn't necessarily have last year at Georgia. He's got one of the best wide receiver trios in the entire country. He's also got that, continuity from offensive coordinator to Dabo. They've been together now for multiple years, he and Garrett Riley, the OC. And something about Klubnik's game that I think came to light a little bit more last year is his ability to run the football. Because a lot of times, Kenton, we talked about it last season, oftentimes Klubnik had to be Clemson's best running back at times, in addition to being their quarterback. Now, in terms of Klubnik, not only is he's a very good quarterback, I don't necessarily think he's a guy who's going to set the NFL on fire in a couple of years, but he's a very good quarterback in a great situation. And I think that's a deadly combination. Like, if you just take his talent in a vacuum versus a guy like Cam Ward last year, I don't think it's apples to apples. But, Cade Klubnik is an excellent quarterback who's in one of the better situations in the country. And I think that's why he's expected to be one of the top passers in the game this year.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I look at Cade Klubnik and I see, you and I disagree on what we could see his ceiling being in the league, because I think he could be a guy that sets the league on fire. Last year, the biggest knock on him was decision-making. Everything else, we saw it. Even when he was a young pup, we saw the arm strength. We saw the wheels. It was just applying it in the silliest and goofiest of ways where you're like, why would you pull the ball there? Donno, you're a Miami guy. I'm sure you remember that read option that wasn't an option where there were 3 guys standing on the edge just waiting there. He's like, I'm going to pull it. I can run through all 3 of them. And it's like, what are we doing there?
And by the way, and Dabo threw him under the bus after that too. He was like, that's on Cade. That was all him. He went rogue.
But like Zach said, great players don't let that one moment define them. And that is one thing that I have to give Cade Klubnik his credit for, because he came back and bounced back from that. I see him as a guy that he's finally putting together all the things that we saw. And biggest difference between him and what we saw out of Drew Allar late in the playoffs, he was a playoff riser. When he got to the college football playoffs, he threw as many touchdowns against Texas secondary darn near as they had allowed all season. That's an actual stat. Look that up. I believe they allowed 4 the entire regular season playing in the SEC, and he threw 3. That's the type of guy that we're talking about right now. So when I look at Cade Klubnik, I absolutely look at a guy that can ball. And I'm going to be very honest. And I know people are going to say, oh, he's rage baiting. He's trying to get the fans upset again. I see Drew Allar as a guy, if he was in the ACC, I would see him as quarterback. I'd say 3A. I'd say 3A with Haynes King. That's where I'd probably have him at.
So wait, so hold on that. So if you've got Klubnik 1, who do you have 2 then?
Oh, Kevin Jennings. Kevin Jennings is definitely my 2 guy. The more film that I watched
my guy Beck, is he chop liver?
No. I think Beck is a strong 4. I think Beck is a strong 4. I really do. This is the thing. Everybody thinks that I hate, Carson Beck, and I hate Drew Allar. I don't dislike these guys. I hope they have all the success that they go out there and achieve. From the film I've watched, I just don't see the vision on, like, he was so good, he would have been the number 1 pick last year. That's hogwash. No player is coming back to college if they were going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Nobody. I don't care how you cut it, how you slice it. That just doesn't happen.
Allow me to respond. So he would have gone in if there was a bit of a guarantee that he was going to be the number 1. There was chatter, there was interest, but he wanted that guarantee that he was going to be number 1. And I don't think he was pushing Cam Ward. This last year's version of Drew Allar was not near that version of Cam Ward going into the NFL draft. Could Drew, on potential alone, warrants that top 10, top 15 from last season? I think the same thing is going to be said in this year's NFL draft when that cycle rolls around again. So Allar will be in play to be the number 1 pick this time around. So will Cade Klubnik. Sure. Carson Beck, I think he could sneak back into the first round because there was chatter that he was a first-round QB once upon a time. If we're talking about college football skill set, because long-term, Allar, Klubnik, Beck are and Cam Ward had those first round or top NFL draft pick caliber of profiles. Kevin Jennings, I do need to see him more as a decision maker. It's kind of a one read and go, but the athleticism is there, all of the other things. So that's that decision making and pure, accuracy and throwing ability, because I think Drew Allar is the best pure passer from a talent standpoint. But okay, how does he respond when he's under a little bit of adversity? Because I think Allar's biggest enemy is up in the helmet. It's between the ears. So if Allar can build, and that's what I mean, you hit the lowest of lows on national TV against Notre Dame, you better overcome that adversity or you won't measure up in the NFL. Guys will get in your head immediately and you will fizzle out. But I think I'm going to give the optimistic look that Allar is going to learn because of that moment. So I think Allar is one of the Klubnik, Allar earned that tier 1 of quarterbacks with Arch Manning. Now you can debate who's actually number 1. That's fine. But I think in tier 1, those 3 are in there alongside with some others, that I can't come up with off the top of my head.
I want to say this about the situation here with Drew Allar and where he is and all that. My biggest question mark about him, it feels like you mentioned Mac Jones earlier. It feels a lot like that, in that Penn State has created a lot of very good situations for him. We can say, hey, his receivers weren't getting open all that much. You got a Mackey Award-winning tight end. If you don't look at I believe he won the Mackey. Did he not? Am I incorrect there? Or
he won the Mackey and he was 7th in the Heisman voting.
Right.
Okay, perfect. So you've got a pass catcher that is all of that. And then you've got 2 backs that, pick your poison. Which one do you want? How do you want it? How do you feel? These 2 can give it to you any way you want it. And I sit here and I say to myself, we looked at him, and objectively on the biggest stage, he was the Achilles heel. That to me is worrisome because it has me with the question of, if things need to be perfect for you to succeed, how can I draft you high? If I've got the number one pick, you're going to have to make things happen. There's things aren't going to be on schedule. You're not going to have a receiving core that they look at and say, oh man, we're a great receiving core, great offensive line. It just so happened that we lost 15 games last year out of nowhere. So that's my biggest concern in terms of him being that guy. Was there chatter about him being a number one pick? I'm sure there was. Every golden boy that's 6'4", 6'5", can move a little bit in the pocket and can hit a wide open receiver. They're going to say, is he Josh Allen? Do we see Josh Allen-esque? What do we have here? But I'm not sure that necessarily pans out going forward, which is, again, very similar to my complaints with Carson Beck in that, he did have receivers with drop problems, but he also had 3 offensive linemen drafted in the top 100 picks. He did have guys where you say, man, these guys are not giving them a great running game. Okay, great. But that defense continues to turn out at least 3 first-round picks per draft. So it's like, how much do we give you credit for succeeding in a great situation?
Right. Well, no doubt. And I love the comparisons, and I really hope we get some of these matchups. Like, I hope, we fast forward 4 or 5 months, we're not talking about Penn State taking on a team other than Miami or Clemson or Louisville or SMU. So I hope we get one of these, and always a great time to connect with you fellas. And we hadn't seen Zach. We did some of those post-game shows, the 3 of us, after college football playoff games last season. So hopefully we can do that again. So make sure you follow Locked On Nittany Lions and Zach Seyko, Zach_Seyko on X. Make sure you follow Kenton at TGIF_Kenton. Check him out on Locked On ACC with me. Follow me at Alex Donno. And we'll talk to you all next time on another episode of Locked On Nittany Lions or Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.